Right, the inaugural 2030 reading panel, chaired by Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, has called for fundamental reforms to ensure that all children read for meaning by the age of 10 by the year 2030. Currently, 78% of children cannot read for meaning. Estimates are that at current rates of progress, it'll take 80 years before all children learn to read in South Africa. Joining us now to discuss the 2030 reading panel's vision is reading advocate Hulisani Ravelo. Hulisani, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
78% of children not being able to read for meaning is a startling figure, to say the least. Talk to us about, how the reading panel hopes to change this for the better.
You know, when the reading panel was convened and we had our first meeting about 2 weeks ago, when we read that stat, you are kind of like hit in the face with a reality that you're like, it can't be.
Yeah.
Surely it can't be that bad. And it's one of those things that you ask yourself, how are we to progress as a nation if at the base root of it all, our kids are unable to read for meaning and for understanding. So I think to put into context, before we talk about the vision of the reading panel and how we aim to hold government accountable, is to give viewers an understanding of what it means when a child can't read for meaning. So if a sentence in a book said, John has a red ball and John throws the ball across the street, a child will be able to read that sentence verbatim and read it back to you. But when we go back and you ask the child to kind of like analyze the sentence and give you facts about what they've just read, they can't do that. So if you said, what color is John's ball? They don't know. If you said, where did John's ball go? They can't tell you that it went across the street. And that's problematic, because if you're unable to do that, it means that you're unable to have an understanding where you can express yourself as an individual as you navigate your way through life. And it's the basis of all things. I think the Human Rights Commission put it well when they said, the right to read is a basic human right. Just like the right to water, to food, to sanitation, to housing, the right to read should be right up there. And so what the reading panel aims to do by the year 2030 is to get all young South Africans by the age of 10 being able to read for meaning. And we're going to do that by holding government accountable. We are a civil society organization that is made up of different people. Like, there's people from all walks of life. You've got your organizations, your civil rights organizations, like Fundawande, the right to read as well. Then you've also got people like myself who are media personalities who just love reading. You grow up loving reading, and you've got the ability to use your platform to be able to express yourself. Then we've got businessmen, and we've got people who move in spaces where they have influence. And so by coming together in this room and having these different ideas, different people, and intergenerational conversation, I think it's very important to talk about that we've got the young and the old coming together and having this interdisciplinary conversation of how do we ensure that by 2030 we reach this goal. And ours is a civil society organization that holds government accountable and says, you said you're going to do this. You said this was a fundamental goal of yours in your 2019 speech, Mr. President. Where are we at?
Yeah. Just listening to you, I'm really deeply concerned about, personal development. I mean, you talk about how being able to read and write means that you can apply yourself and understand concepts that speak to your personal development, that speaks to what you want in life, where you're trying to go. And so the idea that 78% of our children don't have that ability is a concern, especially when we talk about the economy, for instance. We know that it is, stagnant at the moment, if not growing at all. We're talking about reconstructing and recovering from COVID-19, and yet the future of this country, being the children themselves, are unable to apply themselves. It is scary to note that we are in this predicament.
It's scary to note, however, I think it's important for us as a society to also know that there's hope. There is a solution, and there are solutions, and we need to really work together and come together and find ways in which not only we are active as citizens, but obviously organizations and the Department of Basic Education are held accountable to the very mandate that they have, which is to progress education in this country, and to do so in a manner that ensures that every single child in this country will be able to not only be a member of society and a member of the economy and participate, but you're actually able to do so in a meaningful manner and in a way that not only moves the country forward, but also moves you as an individual forward. I know for a fact that you and I would not be sitting in the spaces that we're sitting in had we not been able to open a book and explore story, explore dreams, explore fiction and non-fiction, just the ability to open your world. And that's what books do for you. They give you a chance to escape a reality that you might otherwise find yourself in. You know, personally for me, reading kind of like saved my life. You know, I was a child growing up in Soweto, then we moved to Hillbrow, and I had a library card like for every place we lived in, whether it was Hillbrow, Windsor, you name it. I had a City of Joburg library card. I had a library card for the Heathway Library Center, which is in Windsor. And I was just always in a book because it gave me the escapism of not being in this reality that I sometimes found myself in, which wasn't favorable. But it also opened my eyes and my thinking to what the world could be.
I love that. I love that so much. Talking about the panel itself, you've mentioned that the makeup is just so diverse. I mean, you've got human rights advocates, specialists, you've got broadcasters such as yourself, business people. But you've repeatedly mentioned that the panel wants to hold government accountable. Are there other areas of society that also need to be held accountable? The fact that 78% of children read without meaning is an indictment on the entirety of our society, not just government. And I'm wondering if we're having conversations with business, civil society, are we having conversations, you know, with educational specialists, so that not only do we get to the bottom of the problem, which may be systemic at this point, but also, you know, not just top-down, bottom-up.
No, definitely. I agree with what you're saying, that it's not just an indictment on government. You know, I think they are the biggest stakeholder in terms of having the Department of Education. But you're absolutely correct that it's a reflection on all of us. It's a reflection on all of us as parents, as Rakhadis and Malumes, teachers as well, and as business. And so that was the whole point of bringing a panel together of so many different people. And when we launched the panel, in the room, there were educators, there were people from different walks of society, so we could understand how do we plug into each other and help each other? How do we understand what the teachers are struggling with at the moment? So one thing I'll be able to share with you that the report brought through was the fact that there are 10 resources that a foundation phase teacher needs in order to be able to help their learners learn how to read. In South Africa currently, foundation phase teachers have one resource out of that 10, and that is this workbook over here. One. So now, if we are to hold teachers accountable and hold government accountable, but they don't have the very resources that they need in order to be able to teach, that becomes, there becomes a need for us to ask another question of where is the issue? And that's why you're talking about systemic issues where we can't just go from the top down. We now also need to go from the bottom up, you know, to say, okay, when a child does receive this book, are they actually using it at home? The teacher only goes so far. Once they are done with the child at school, are you as a parent encouraging your child to read? Are you picking up the book? Because also children do as you do, not as you say. So a parent can sit there and say, Bala buka ya wena. It's time to read. But if you as a parent, and I know not all parents have time, but if you are also not picking up a magazine, picking up a book and showing your child that reading actually is something that we do in this home, you cannot expect the onus to only rely on the government and the teacher. So it is looking at a whole 360-degree approach.
Absolutely. I think the task that the panel is taking on was humongous. It was massive, mammoth, really. At the end of 2019, before the advent of COVID-19, right? And 2020 comes around, March, and the world is struck by this global health pandemic that has exacerbated crises that already existed even before the pandemic itself. In South Africa, we know that, you know, normal programming in our schools only returned just last week. A lot of the learners have had to deal with rotational learning. So there's been a lot of disruption, really, to teaching and learning in this country. And so it does seem as though the task that the panel has been compounded by COVID-19. What have your discussions been around not only tackling getting learners up to speed, but, you know, having to deal with the delays and the disruptions that have come about because of COVID?
That's an absolute reality. You know, what you're sharing is one of the items that came out from the report, which was so excellently put together by education economist Professor Nick Spall, and he's actually one of the panel members that speaks about the impact of COVID-19 on learning and the fact that a grade 4 learner today that was done, they studied them and they did a whole research on them. A grade 4 learner today does not know as much as a grade 3 learner knows, which means that you can obviously see the dip. You know, if a grade 3 learner is smarter on certain elements and certain aspects that they're being measured on than a grade 4 learner, you can understand what the last 2 years have done.
Yes.
And we're really grateful to the department that we have gone back to regular programming and kids are back at school. But ours as a panel is to ask the Department of Education, what is the plan to catch up on the past 2 years? So it's great that we're back at school. It's wonderful. But what is the action plan? And at this moment, there's no plan. There's nobody that's come out and said, we have asked ourselves the question, how do we help our learners catch up? This is how we're going to do it, and this is the budget that we're allocating to it. And that's one of the biggest elephants in the room, you know, that really need to be discussed. And it's one that we're going to be watching the Minister of Finance in the next 2 weeks very closely about on where are we putting the money?
Money talks.
Money does talk. You know, one of the recommendations that come from the reading panel's report is about how we need less slogans and we actually need budget. We need to put our money where our mouths are at, you know. It's great to have campaigns like, let's read to lead, let's have the president's reading circle. It's wonderful, and you can talk about it. But if we go to the budget and you actually look at it line item by line item, do you think you're going to find an allocated amount to reading programs? And if so, on a very granular level? And the answer is no. And that's sad, because you cannot say it's a fundamental goal if you're not going to put money behind it. Otherwise, all we're doing is just sitting here having a cup of tea and talking about wishful thinking.
Look, Khulisani, I think the example that you brought us in studio today makes your argument very clear that of the 10 resources that teachers have, currently our foundational phase teachers only have 1. And that certainly, as I said, is an indictment on our society. And you're right, I think all eyes will be on the finance minister in a couple of weeks from now when we see how he intends to spend state funds when it comes to education. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us.